On behalf of the Manhattan Institute, our chairman, Paul Singer, our president, Larry Moan, it's my pleasure to welcome you here today to this discussion with Senator Tom Coburn, MD. I'm James R. Copeland, the director of the Center for Legal Policy at the Manhattan Institute, and it's my pleasure to be here today and to be with such a distinguished statesman. The way I got picked for this is that we've got a report that we're just releasing today in our Trial Lawyers, Inc. series. We launched this series now 11 years ago, and we've done more than 20 of these. This one focuses on disability law and the trial lawyers' use of disability law to make a lot of money and create headaches for the taxpayers and American businesses. Before I introduce the senator, I do want to just thank some folks that were integral in this report getting done and this event happening. First of all, for the event, our events team headed by Taisha Camacho and Debbie Azard were invaluable. Secondly, in terms of the communications here, to make sure that media knew about this, that folks are listening through the live stream, were aware of this. I want to thank our communications team, Lee Harrington, Michelle Jacob, Catherine Lazarski, and Natalie Nakamura. Third, our editorial team and policy team that was integral in giving us the input, the feedback for this report, the editorial suggestions and the layout, Howard Husick, David Kimball, and Elaine Wren. And finally, my CLP folks at the Center for Legal Policy were absolutely essential. Our researchers, Megan Herwig and Olivia Davidson, and my deputy director, Isaac Gorodetsky, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. So how did I get picked to do this? Because Senator Coburn is one of these folks that could really talk about virtually any of our Manhattan Institute issues with great fluency. We've got a Center for Medical Progress. Here's a practicing physician. We've got a Center for Energy and the Environment. Here's a senator from Oklahoma who knows these energy issues quite well. And of course, we've got our E21 project looking at fiscal policy issues down in Washington, D.C., and this is what the senator has been focusing a lot of his time on and is really known for over the last couple of decades. Well, he's also really sort of opened the black box that is the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. And this program, from very small beginnings in the 1950s, has really grown quite substantially over recent decades. It's 10 times the size now in terms of dollar outlays that it was, as it was when Ronald Reagan took office, and triple the size that it was since George W. Bush took office not that long ago. And the senator really started asking the tough questions on this. We'd been talking about disability law at some time for our Trial Lawyers, Inc. series, and then last fall, 60 Minutes covered the report with some shocking findings that came out of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, where the senator has served as the ranking member. So before we head over and talk with the senator, just want to tell you a little about him. He's a fascinating guy with a fascinating background. He's from the state of Oklahoma, went to Oklahoma State University, where he met his lovely wife, Carolyn, here today. She's a former Miss Oklahoma, by the way, and they have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. And when he was at Oklahoma State, he studied accounting and went into business. There was a family business, Coburn Optical. He was one of the top 10 business school students when he got out of OSU. And then he served as a manufacturing manager for one of the divisions, grew the business substantially from 13 employees to 350, got 35% share of the U.S. market, and then the family sold the business in the late 70s. And he decided to do what anyone in that position would do, go back and go to medical school. So he went to medical school in Oklahoma and has practiced as a family doctor, family practitioner, as well as an obstetrician with a specialist in allergies, has delivered over 4,000 babies. And then after doing that for about a decade, Dr. Coburn decided to run for the U.S. House. And he did that successfully in 1994 with a large Republican takeover of the House. served 3 terms there because as part of the contract with America, you'll recall, they were supporting term limits, and a lot of the candidates were signing these pledges, we're going to only serve 3 terms. Well, Dr. Coburn actually honored his pledge and stepped down after 6 years in the House. In 2004, he turned around and ran for Senate, pledging to serve no more than 2 terms there, was elected, and has been a leader. And when I think of Dr. Coburn, I think of a true statesman, and that's really a rare word to be used nowadays for politicians. We have a lot of politicians, not a lot of statesmen. In a true Burkean tradition, here's somebody who is principled, but is also prudent, who is loyal to party, but is nonpartisan, that is willing to work for the betterment of the country, not just today, but decades down into the future. And that's really when I think of Dr. Coburn and his work in the House and Senate trying to focus on the fiscal policy questions, the solvency of our country long term. That's what I think about. He's crossed party lines with President Obama, with Democrat leaders, as well as been a leader within the Republican caucus. So, Dr. Coburn, it's our pleasure to have you here today, and we're going to go talk some about disability law. Don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to ask questions at the end for audience members, and there's plenty of things I'm sure you want to ask about other than disability law, including something that happened last night during the UNC Duke football game that I didn't watch. So.
Thank you.
Senator, you've taken a leading role in combating fraud and abuse and waste in the government quite broadly, but also specifically when it comes to the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. What got you focused on this program, and what got you so interested in what was going on there?
Well, I think initially I got interested in it as a practicing physician when, when I would have attorneys approach me and say, I need you to do an evaluation. And of course you go through and you follow the guidelines and do it, and then the attorney calls you back and says, I can't ever send you another case again because you didn't approve my claim for disability. Even though you're following the guidelines. So, you know, I had a little ear that there was a problem with it. And then I also was very interested in it in terms of being a physician for several of the manufacturing facilities there, in terms of the fraud that was being perpetrated upon them in terms of their workers' comp. And so we started coordinating camera shots of people who were on disability and what their activity was when nobody was watching, and started actually seeing that. But more importantly, as I got into Congress, I saw the results of unintended consequences. And when this just passed head of Social Security came before the Finance Committee for his nomination and approval, he wasn't asked one question about Social Security. He was asked about how fast can you get rid of the backlog. No, there wasn't anything about program integrity. There was, here's what we're hearing from home, that it takes too long to get adjudicated if in fact you are disabled, and that's a legitimate thing to raise. But no consequential questions about the program, its integrity, its long-term viability. And if you go back and read that, nothing was said about it. So he came out of the Senate Finance Committee with a mandate to put everybody he could on Social Security disability. And he did. And so today in our country, somewhere between 1 in 15 and 1 in 17 Americans are on disability. Of everybody. Children, you know, top to bottom. And when you look around, at least I look around at my community, I don't see 1 in 17 people that can't perform a job in the economy. I mean, that's the definition of disabled. There's not a job in the economy that you can't perform, that you can perform. And so we started looking at it, and actually what really piqued my interest was as we got a little bit of a good article, actually it was a great article by the Wall Street Journal, looking at some cases in Kentucky. And so I sent 4 investigators, and we spent 2.5, 3 years looking at what was actually going on in Kentucky and Ohio in terms of disability fraud. And at the same time, we asked the Social Security disability system that we would like 300 random cases that you've approved for us to look at, to follow your guidelines. And That was a fight just getting to do that. We finally got to do that. Thank you to Carl Levin, who is an honest broker when it comes to government waste. And so we went through those 300 cases, all spread across the country, and what we found is 28% of them didn't even come close to meeting the requirements of the law for disability. Unbeknownst to us at that time, Social Security knew that 28% of all the cases they approved weren't accurate, but didn't tell anybody. So what you had was you have an uncontrolled system that's now spending $40 billion more a year than it's taken in, and by the end of next year we'll have no money left in it, which means the people who are truly dependent on disability payments, who really can't offer themselves a sustenance or an ability, are going to have a decline in what they collect by about 20% because all these other people who aren't truly disabled are taking their money. And so it's time to fix it. And so we did the undercover investigation with subpoenas of bank accounts, subpoenas of judges' records, of their own personal bank accounts, of lawyers' bank accounts, and we created a record that's rock solid in terms of the felonious behavior of both administrative law judges, of lawyers, and individuals. And I'm sorry to say to this day that neither U.S. attorney in either Kentucky or Ohio have processed those claims. And it's a slam dunk. Five doctors should be in jail. 4 administrative law judges should be in jail. And about 7 lawyers should be in jail. Not paying back the money, they should be in jail because of what they're doing. And so we have a little thing we're working on that may get that picked between now and the time my next 5 weeks. I'm hopeful to do that. If not, I certainly will speak about it on the Senate floor and embarrass the local politicians of those 2 states because they haven't done it. But it comes back. This is a similar problem to every other problem we have. We don't have a problem that we can't fix in our country. They're all fixable. But you have to admit that there's a problem before you start to address it. And we have not gotten to that point. Otherwise, we would have fixed Social Security. And there's good hope on that, and I'll talk about that if you want and later.
Sure. Well, one of the problems here is that the types of claims we're seeing have shifted. And so as a medical professional, you may be able to shed some light on it. In the report on page 5, those of you who want to flip through, there's a figure 5 and 6, and they've got some pie chart graphs. And what we show is that the types of claims today versus what we saw 50 years ago are quite different. So 50 years ago, you had very few claims looking at things like mental illness or what's effectively back pain. And these dominate most claims today, whereas stuff that you used to see a lot of, like heart disease, there's very little in terms of the disability claims. Of course, medical advances, I mean, the irony here is medical advances have made it far easier for disabled individuals to work, as have shifts in the economic environment where you see a lot more jobs where accommodation is easy as compared to more factory and agricultural jobs where you needed a lot of physical labor. So as a physician, what can you say about how do we stop the claims for mental illness or back pain or things like that? Because it seems like it just is too discretionary for a judge to rule out.
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, most physicians, and I'm sure there's some physicians in the room, know what a Minnesota multiphasic personality test is. And we've used that for years to help us assess the truthfulness of what our patients are telling us. The former commissioner of the Social Security system disallowed all use of all psychological testing in terms of feigning illness. So you took away from the good administrative law judges a very good tool with which to make an assessment combined with everything else they were seeing on whether or not they were being truthful. But technology is going to solve this because here's what's coming, and you may have seen it. Some of you may be aware of this. There are several firms in the United States now that are doing biometric testing on every employee that comes to work for anybody. And there's an assessment of every joint, of every organ system, and it's not published, as they say, it's recorded, And if they come up with a claim, it's compared to what was found when they were hired. And the studies so far find that 95% of all the claims was present before, didn't have anything to do with work. They had the pre-existing illness prior to it, and they can document it. So the technology is going to solve a lot of this problem in terms of the workman's comp issues and in terms of some of the disability, but not in terms of Social Security disability, because we can't use those in Social Security disability.
But that's something we could fix in theory.
Yeah,
You're saying if we had the will
fixable.
to do so.
It can be solved. I think the other thing is we need to recognize a little bit of the decline of our culture. Quite frankly, this country was built on a can-do spirit that I can accomplish, and if I work hard, I'll do this. And we've kind of averaged through some of our, what I would say, programs that undermine that concept, that if you're not successful, it's somebody else's fault. It's not yours. And so therefore somebody owes you something for it. That's my personal belief, and I think it's been very detrimental because I think it's cost us a lot in terms of productivity. It's cost us a lot in terms of innovation. It's cost us a lot in terms of happiness of individuals being successful in their life because they accomplished it, because we gave them an off-ramp exit. It was somebody else's fault. So I think there's great hope that these things can be fixed. The question is you got to have the people that'll stand up with the courage to say we need to fix it. And I will just tell you, there's a gentleman by the name of Henry Claypool who truly represents the disability community. And I'm working with him every day to try to rewrite the Social Security disability laws so that the people who are truly disabled get the benefit of our tax dollars and their tax dollars, and those that don't, the shysters, get thrown out of the system. And they're interested in that because, we all want to help those who need our help. But it's really not very pleasant to say, to be able to help somebody that needs my help, I've got to help the guy that's chiseling on me. And so I think you're going to see us come together, both the disability community and Congress, with a solution that straightens a lot of this out. For example, today, Social Security's evaluation of whether or not you're continually disabled is a postcard mailed to your house. Well, if you're honest and you're not disabled anymore, you might answer it, I'm not disabled anymore. Of course, your check stops. But if you're dishonest and say, no, I'm still disabled, your check continues. That's our continuing disability review. And the thought is that you can classify disability into about 4 groups, and you can put the first group into, you have a limited period of time of which you collect disability because you have a true problem, but you have to reapply after a period of time rather than you just continue to get your disability. The second sign is to allow people who truly have disability to work without penalizing them until you've really gotten them back into the workplace. And we have great experience at that. We have a wonderful young man in Oklahoma by the name of Jason Price. Last year, he put 380 quadriplegics in Oklahoma into full-time employment. They're no longer collecting Social Security. They're paying Social Security. They pay for their own health insurance through their employers. 380. And this is one man did this in Oklahoma. So our approach needs to be about rehabilitation and giving people opportunity and strength of their character of what they can do given whatever their disability is. And so it's that combination of dividing that and creating other incentives. I think we're going to be able to solve this. And I'm excited that James Langford, who's my replacement coming, Ben Sass, another young man from Nebraska who's coming, are very much interested in that. Tom Carper from Delaware, my wonderful chairman in Homeland Security. We've worked together tremendously. Don't let anybody tell you we don't work together. We work together all the time. It's just a story that's told to affect the politics. They want to solve these problems, and they're solvable. But we have to have the courage to go out and talk about them, and talk about them truthfully.
Well, I certainly hope that Senator Langford and the others will continue to fight this good fight. One of the things we focus on, of course, we focus on the trial lawyers and the lawyers' role in this. And we show that each year over the last several years, lawyers have been pocketing over $1 billion a year in helping individuals process their Social Security disability claims. Now, in principle, we obviously want to allow lawyers to do that. It may be difficult to navigate the process. And in 2004, the Congress actually loosened these rules and allowed non-lawyers to do it as well. One of the unintended side effects of that, though, in our opinion, that it made the business model for Trial Lawyers, Inc. far more profitable here, because the statutory cap is $6,000. So that's the most you can get helping someone get a Social Security disability claim. And that means that if you're a lawyer with an opportunity cost at lawyer billing rates, it's not that great a model. But if your law firm can effectively be a marketing company, and you advertise broadly and get a lot of people who want to go on disability, and then you hire other people and you pay them less, it becomes very profitable. And we showed that there were 9 different lawyers a year making over $2 million a year, the leading firm making over $20 million a year in this. So it's become quite a profitable business, and again, over $1 billion overall. How do we tackle that problem? Is there a way to tackle that problem?
Yeah, there is. The Social Security, remember, if somebody comes before an administrative law judge today, they've already been turned down twice by people who absolutely know Social Security law. There are loyal federal employees who know these rules inside and out. And they've already been denied twice. But if you go before an administrative law judge and the judge hadn't read what they've said, which is the other big problem which we've found with the administrative law judges. By the way, when we first started working on this, the approval rate was 82%, it's 46% now. That's what oversight does. But the answer to that is to have the qualified federal employees who made the decision to turn them down in the first place in the courtroom representing us for why they were turned down. See, we have nobody representing the American taxpayer in the courtroom. We only have somebody representing the claimant. And there's no balance. And we have some great administrative law judges. I don't mean to impugn them all. But we also have some very lazy administrative law judges who don't read the record, who don't do what they need to do to be prepared, and multiple times will never ask somebody a question. They'll be before them in the court, and in 5 minutes they've adjudicated it and have never read the record or anything else. They just, because the emphasis is to get the cases through. So it's the worst of law, because it feigns to be a legal, fair system. In essence, there's nothing fair or legal about it as it is processed. So I think there's great opportunity to fix this, and the administrative law judges, I think, would like to see it fixed, so that they actually. But there's all sort of these grid patterns that haven't been adjusted based on jobs and all sorts of things. The rule in the statute is if there's a job you can do in the economy, you're not disabled. And we've totally ignored what the statute says, which is one of our big problems in Washington today. You know, it doesn't matter what Congress says. Sometimes administrations kind of decide they're going to do what they want to do anyway. And that's what actually happened in the Social Security Administration. And so it's entirely fixable, but we need principles, we need discipline, we need leadership. Washington lacks leadership more than it lacks anything. We have some great new people coming in. Jay Johnson at Homeland Security, I'm a big believer in him. I mean, he's a great leader for an agency that's never had a great leader. And so we're seeing some positive things. So it's not that we can't fix what's wrong in Washington, it's that you got to have leadership and people with the courage to stand on the principles they believe in and take the heat. I told Bob McDonald, you know, there's still the problem in firing all these people who actually cheated and cost people their lives in the VA. He said, I still don't have the authority to fire them. I said, fire them anyway. Fire them anyway, and let's see what the court of law, see what public opinion says as they try to get their jobs back for what they've done to our veterans. But see, that's a little lack of courage. You know, if I were run the VA, everybody that was even questionable would be out of there. And I'd have a row of lawyers, and I'd be spending the same amount of money on lawyers that I'm paying on them, paying them for not working. But we lack courage, and that's our big problem. We lack vision, we lack courage.
Well, that's something that you, Senator, I'm proud to say, have never lacked. And before we open to the audience for questions, and I want to give a lot of time for the audience to ask questions with you here and so many things going on, I do want to just step back a little from the disability, Social Security disability question and speak more broadly on the fiscal situation and see what your thoughts are on it. You've worked on Social Security and Medicare, more broadly the entitlements, how we might get from A to B to fix the long-term actuarial look for the U.S. government. And of course, now the Senate's going to be back in Republican hands. You'll be leaving it, but your colleagues will be, you'll have a different leadership in the Senate. What would your advice be to them now that they've retaken the majority in the Senate, going forward on how to tackle the big fiscal questions that really face our government?
Well, I think my first advice is don't be afraid to lose. Losing with honor is classy. Doing the right thing for the right reason and not winning, and that's where the cowardice of Washington comes in. Republicans ought to pass a budget, which means they'll have to cast some very terrible votes, but certainly they're capable, if they were elected U.S. Senators, to defend their votes, why they voted the way they did. Pass a budget, pass the appropriation bills like the Constitution says. Give the government the money that it needs to run, and then spend all the rest of the time oversighting how they're spending it. Because I guarantee you, and people think I exaggerate, but I've pretty well proven it, there's $400 billion a year that is absolutely blown at the federal level. And I'll give you just an easy example. We spend $84 billion on IT a year. Last year, we've totally documented with GAO, $39 billion of it was blown. Got nothing for $39 billion of it. Why would you keep doing the same thing? But we do. So I would say they should stand up and lead. And I'm not talking about from social conservative causes. I'm talking about principled causes about how you secure the future of our country. There will become a time when people don't want to loan us money. I know a lot of people don't believe that. And we do sit in a wonderfully geographical place where we're protected on both ends of our nation. But there'll be a time that we're going to get challenged. And the thing that makes a country great isn't its war machine, it's its economy to be able to defend itself. And as we lose more and more of our capability to have an entrepreneurial system based on proper allocation of capital, not improper, not induced allocation of capital, but proper allocation of capital, we're going to see our country grow. And it doesn't matter what our political philosophy is, whether it's hard left or hard right, the implications of the policy results of that affect us all the same. And that's what my friend, the president, doesn't get right now. Is it all affects us all the same, and our families. And we're all Americans, and we're Americans first. And it's heartbreaking to see where we are.
With that note, let's ask the audience to ask some questions here. And see. Yes, up here. Wait for the microphone and please identify yourself. Thanks.
I'm Lee Bowes, and I am the CEO of America Works. And we have been for 30 years doing welfare to work initially, but we work with thousands of people on disability in different cities throughout the country to get them back to work. You talked about closing the front end and that problem, but there is no mandatory program for people to look for work as they collect disability. That was changed in 1996 for welfare. Is there any movement to do that for the disability program? Because right now, in Nashville, Tennessee, if we have 8,000 people on disability, maybe 800 say I'm interested in work, and 100 actually apply for jobs.
Well, I think one of the best answers is incentives. And matter of fact, there's a gentleman by the name of Doak who I think he's at Cato, who has a wonderful idea of how you combine 2 or 3 different labels in this, where you really incentivize people who are on disability, have a legitimate disability, maybe not totally life-limiting disability, how you can actually incentivize them to get back into the workplace.
But that exists currently.
No, I'm talking to no, those don't work. The ones that exist today do not work because they don't incentivize to the degree to cause people to action. So you have to incentivize to create action, and you measure that until you get action. And so what they're saying is you really incentivize it so you don't take away their disability till they're totally standing on their own and they won't recognize the loss of their disability payment. And here's why that's important. I'm okay with continuing to pay somebody their disability payment that is at that point, because you know what that's doing? That's changing their whole outlook on their life. It's changing the outlook of their life and how it impacts their family. It creates a sense of prosperity and possibility. So what we've done is not incentivize it enough. All the programs Social Security has tried on that, all of them have failed. None of them have worked because they haven't incentivized them properly. And I think if you look at what Cato is, we're going to try to put this into this bill. I got so much stuff I want to try to get done in 5 weeks. And we're having that meeting next week while I'm gone. But if you truly incentivize it enough, you will get behavior changes. And what we've done is not do that. And so you put a negative disincentive. If you have a limited disability, you got to reapply. But if you have a real one, we're going to really say attaboy to you if you're coming along and really doing it. And to prove that you don't even have to do that is you look at what Jason Price did. With no benefit, he put 318 people to work last year. With no benefit, no incentive. And they're all proud as a peacock because they no longer collect a check. And they're paying taxes every day. And Jason, by the way, is born in a wheelchair.
Over here.
David Musher. I do have a question, but first I want to thank you very much for sharing your humanity and wisdom with us. I realize that there is a large underground economy that's never heard of a W-2 form. But I wonder, is there communication between Social Security and the IRS to see who might be cheating?
Well, that's a great question. I spent an hour and a half in Sam Johnson's office this last week. Sam is the subcommittee chairman over the Social Security for Ways and Means out of the House. We have a bill that will cause the death master file to be shared with every agency in the federal government that it needs to be shared with. Now, that sounds like common sense, right? That if you're giving out stuff, that you ought to know who's dead and who's not. I can't get that through the House. We've passed it out of our committee. It's passed the Senate. It'll save us about $29 billion in fraud a year. I can't get the Social Security number off your Medicare card. Why? Because of fraud. You know, that we have all this fraud in Medicare, which is $100 billion a year, by the way. That's Medicare. That's not Medicaid. That's Medicare. So I'm not a good enough statesman to be able to convince, and that's my biggest failing as a senator, is I'm not a good enough orator to convince people that here's a better way of doing something that will actually save us a ton of money. And you're dead on your question, because you know most of our agencies work pretty good, and most of them have good intentions, But if we don't give them the tools with which to utilize to eliminate fraud and duplication, they can't do it. And so I can't get that through the House, through a Republican House. And it'll save us tons of money. You know, it also will save us $13 billion on illegal child tax credits. That's on top of the $27 billion. So that's, you know, $40 billion. It's 5 times the budget of the state of Oklahoma.
Yes, up here.
Harry Lewis. Senator, what you've just said poses an obvious question to me, and that is, what's the problem with the House, our Republican House? The other question, very simply, is driving across northeastern Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago, I saw these gigantic billboards put up by lawyers that say Social Security, disability, we get it for you, in gigantic letters.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be, as Jim mentioned, some sort of industry going on that may even amount to Social Security disability mills. Like being
Yeah, well, there's no question they're there.
And just wanted to ask you, if that's driving this in part, how does that affect what Congress is doing? Is there an element of, if you like, political influence to keep the system corrupt?
No, it's actually less direct than that. Sam Johnson's staff is worried that if you allow too many people to have the death master file, that it will get out outside of the government's hands. So it's actually a more conservative viewpoint that they don't trust the bureaucracies enough to share it with them, which is a problem in and of itself, because that means we don't manage government very well, and everybody knows we don't. There are mills. Khan, the guy that we did, $5 million the last year we checked. That's what he pocketed. Bender and Bender, we're in the midst of doing them right now, and we've taken lots of depositions, and that'll continue after I leave. And you know, I can say it and not get sued because I'm still a U.S. senator. These guys are crooks. What they're doing is deceptive to both the people that they're promising things to and also thievery of the American taxpayer.
And we've got in the report a picture of Mr. Khan's, one of his billboards is in the report, as well as an artistic rendering of Charles Bender. So, over here, yes.
Hi, Daniel Schuckman, MSD Capital. Thank you for what you're doing. Given some of the things that you've said about the realities of the way sort of government is institutionally working, almost irrespective of party, and given the fact that it seems that in the country, on the one hand, people want something done about our fiscal situation. On the other hand, they really want their pork at the same time. What's the roadmap for our government as an institution, as you see it in your experiences, being able to do some of the things you're talking about to address these problems preemptively before we are forced to, by a crisis, we can no longer borrow money for whatever contour of the crisis that it takes?
Well, I think it's a great question. I've given a lot of thought to it. One of the reasons I'm leaving the Senate was because I actually think I can have a greater impact outside of the Senate than I can in. Specifically an Article 5 convention, to where we force a balanced budget amendment on the United States. And let me tell you why that's important. Here's what the typical politician tells you now. Oh, we couldn't cut that, you know, or I'm afraid to tell you I cut it because I don't have a good excuse for cutting it, even though it's pork for you and it's really probably not within the enumerated powers of the Constitution. If, in fact, you have a balanced budget amendment of the Constitution, all of a sudden you give backbone and spines to politicians. They'll actually say, I had to make a choice. We had to balance the budget, so this is what I chose to do this and not to do this. So one is you give courage back to people who have no courage. And number two is if you have an Article 5 convention, you might want to consider term limits. Because this is my personal bias. I'm not saying it's right, but it's my bias. What I see in Washington is a lack of experience about anything except politics. And they got a lot of experience in politics, but they don't know much about the real world. And they don't know much about how business runs, or how schools operate, or what does it mean to help somebody who's down on their line. In other words, the career guide path, and this is Republican and Democrat alike, is the guide path is how do I get in a position where I can continue over the next 34 years to get positive strokes on my back and look good in front of a bunch of people as a elected representative. And if you go back and look at our founding, and you look at the character traits of the people who founded this country, they didn't have any interest in that at all. What they had an interest in was freedom, liberty, progress, pursuit of excellence. It wasn't about them. And what I see in Washington is it's all about Washington and not about our kids and not about our country.
Yes, back here, Debbie. Oh, Chuck.
This is a very naive question, but on a different topic, would you comment and use your brains and your judgment on whether the ideal outcome of the healthcare debate and the ACA is total repeal versus trying to improve it? Which is better?
I don't really know the answer. I've offered some alternatives to try to improve it with Richard Burr and Orrin Hatch. I'm kind of a Frederick Hayek guy. I actually believe markets work. I don't think they're perfect, but I know they're better than anything we can devise. And look, we didn't have a good system before the ACA. We had misallocation of resources. We weren't measuring quality appropriately. We didn't have great outcomes. We spent a ton of money on it. But I think markets work. And we've never really given markets a chance to help us in healthcare. And so could we not design a system that had a true safety net? And I'm talking a true safety net for those who truly need it, not those who want to game it. And then create a system where actually the Adam Smith in your soul says, what is in my best economic interest? And we've all kind of said, let's not even think about that. Well, that's what built this country. That philosophy is what built this country. So if I were king, I'd wipe it all apart. I'd create a great safety net for those people who are truly dependent on us. And I'd say, go for it, markets, and let's have it transparent. Let's have quality transparency. Let's have outcome transparency. Let's have price transparency. And if you want to insure against it, you can. If you want to save against it, you can. And we'll do the things to help you do that. And by the way, you can be a great consumer of health care. The medical community wants you to think you can't, but you can. And there shouldn't be one place in this country you don't know outcomes and quality and costs. And you can make that determination. And are you always going to make it right? No. We don't do anything always right. But we ought to have the chance to use what built this country, what put us in the great position that we have been in, which is this free enterprise system that says capital is going to flow where it gets the greatest return as long as you have a transparent economy. It's when you lose transparency is when markets don't work. And we can get transparency into the healthcare, and we ought to. And we failed to do that, and so we got what we have today. And it's a hybrid, and it's going to be very expensive. And I will predict to you as a physician and also as a patient now the costs are going to go high and the outcomes are going to decline.
In the back.
Two questions. The first is, what is the big problem if the fact that someone is dead leaks outside the government? And the second question is, what about some blunt instruments like restricting the number of disability applications that any legal practice or medical practice can handle in a year to 5 or 10?
Well, to your second question is, as somebody's free market, if we have lawyers out there that want to have a disability practice, I don't have any problem if they want to do 10 million. You know, I don't want to limit people. I want to give them opportunity. So I would not want to have a limitation. I'm kind of a purist, as you can see, in terms of markets. I actually believe markets are there. The problem with the numbers leaking out is people go and do things with those Social Security numbers and that death master file after they're gone and create all the kind of stuff you can imagine that's going on the internet is going on in the name of somebody that's dead. And so they collect all this data and then utilize it. And they not only utilize it outside the government, they're utilizing it inside the government where the government isn't aware that the person's dead. You know, we still are paying from 10 years ago 1,500 farmers who are dead. I mean, right now, 1,500. We're still paying them a crop payment because the Department of Agriculture doesn't know. I know they're dead because I've seen them at death master file, but the Department of Agriculture doesn't know they're dead. So I didn't mean to say your question was facetious. I just believe markets work, and what we ought to have is a system that says if you're going to represent somebody in disability, we ought to have a disability where it truly makes a good determination, and it's open and transparent, and everybody can see it, rather than gaming the system and paying somebody to fill out a form as a doctor. One of Mr. Khan's doctors got paid $1 million in 1 year, and he saw the patients, average 35 patients a day, but the forms were already filled out before he signed them by Mr. Khan. So he didn't do an evaluation. He just spent 15 minutes with them and collected a bunch of money and then had something for the record based on what the judge said he wanted.
Wow. Over here, please. And try to identify yourselves again, Michael.
I'm Michael Myers, Executive Director of the New York Civil Rights Coalition. My question is with respect to the size of the disability community, because that is exactly what it is. It keeps expanding as opposed to contracting. And I want to know, do you think it expands on the basis of the economy and our jobs crisis, and that people know how to game the system for purposes of payment because they're unemployed? Or is it expanding because there's something else going on, which you suggested? That is cultural change. The nature of the disability community has now changed beyond physical to emotional and hidden disabilities. Everywhere I go now, there are dogs in restaurants, dogs on trains, because people are disabled. They need their dog. It's the nature of society that's changing.
Yeah,
so my question to you is the cultural changes, and how do you prevent that cultural change with respect to I'm unable to work, I'm unable to get along, I'm unable to walk, I'm unable to go without my help. And at the same time, don't have that go to the next generation. New immigrants have just been allowed to stay in America.
I think that's a phenomenal question. And my answer will be controversial. Everybody in this room has undergone post-traumatic stress disorder. But we've now said, if you have, you got a problem. Well, you know, there are degrees to everything, but what we've added in terms of our smartness and intellect, we've lost in terms of our common sense. And we've had very few people who will then speak up against it. Your question is a wonderful question. You know, 60% of Social Security disability now is emotional and mental. Well, I got a lot of things to be PO'd about right now. But that doesn't mean I'm disabled. And my wife can tell you my behavior's a little different. But I think your question is so insightful because it's cultural. It is cultural. And we've created an expectation that's, you know, I actually yearn for the day that we'll have a leader that'll call us to be better than what we are. We can cheat history in this country. We can cheat history. History says all republics die. That doesn't have to happen here. But we have to have the leadership that calls us above and beyond, to go to the next level, to do the next best thing, and not be satisfied with the average.
In the way back.
Hi. George Will talks a lot about the progressive agenda being a dependency agenda, partially because it's politically expedient to have people that are dependent. I wonder, when you look at the disability program, if you sense any kind of political being sinister, I guess, about the program on the part of some of your colleagues in Congress, looking at it and saying, it may not be great for society, but it's good for me politically. If you sense any of that, or if that could be a reason that it has kind of stayed and expanded the way it has.
No, I don't think I wouldn't attribute that to them, that they created it. I think it happened because Congress is lazy. Congress didn't look at it. Congress, when they approved this the one before last, was interested in getting the heat off of the time that it took to get a disability. I don't think that they were out there. But they do it in every other case, most of them, in terms of what works good at home and how it. But I don't think this directly came about. Look, I think the federal government's incompetent. I mean, I've said it a lot. People are tired of me saying it, but when 50% of everything we do actually is highly inefficient, wasteful. Let me give you a positive, because I hate to. There's a general, a 4-star general, Air Force general, by the name of Wolfensberger. She runs all the material command for the Air Force. I met her 5 years ago, started talking to her about continuous process improvement, Toyota model. She now runs all the material command. During sequestration, she cut an additional, out of a $60 billion budget, she got cut $4 billion. She cut an additional $2.7 billion out of her budget because she was managing it like we know how to manage. And she was taking the heat from her superiors and her inferiors because she had the courage to say, we're going to control our spending. She's just cut another $1.7 billion. It wasn't asked to, did. Give you another story. Colonel, Air Force Base, Altus, Oklahoma. He had been a wing commander but wasn't a base commander. Got to know him during my career in the Senate. I knew he'd eventually get back there as a base commander. And so when I found out he was going, I said, you know where everything's heading here? Let's see what you can cut. Small base, training base. Cut $120 million first year. Got ostracized by the military for cutting $120 million. That describes an absence of leadership in our country. And it starts at the top. And until we fix that, we're not going to fix these other problems.
Yes. Up here. This woman here had her hand up. No, over here. I promised her, sorry. We'll do 2 more. We'll do each of these 2 ones. Okay. Yes.
Senator Joe Malone, there was an op-ed piece either in the Times or the Journal within the last month by a Duke Law School professor suggesting some of the gridlock we have, and you indicated you don't agree with that phrase, but he suggested that the representatives go from 2-year terms to 4-year terms, and senators go for 4-year terms to 8-year terms, hopefully to get a little bit more focus on governance and issues and not constantly fundraising and being worried about a vote that's going to impact a short-term political decision. Well, what's your assessment on the concept?
Well, I don't want to insult him, but has he read the Federalist Papers and read what our founders said about why they had a bicameral legislature and why we had 6 years and why the Senate was supposed to be the cooling sauce so that we didn't respond to public will, but we responded in the best interest? You know, the problem in our system, the problem is who's there. You have career politicians there their number one goal is to stay there. And until you change that, you will not fix this. It doesn't matter how many terms you give them. The fact is their number one goal. I mean, how do we kill earmarks? We kill earmarks only by embarrassing them. I mean, you hear all the talk, they want to bring them back because they want to be able to buy their election again. Look what I did with you. I stole your money. I took it to Washington. I gave you some of it back. Aren't I a great guy? I mean, so I don't mean to belittle that, but the fact is our system, there's nothing wrong with our system. There's something wrong with our character.
One final question over here. It's been patiently waiting. Right here.
You say, I have a double question. You say you don't think there are hidden agendas there. But isn't it the case that the explosion in disability is partly that disability is being treated as extended unemployment?
Yeah.
And doesn't that help the administration in saying, look, we have these wonderful numbers of lowering unemployment, and you're burying the unemployment in disability? And the second part of my question is, I saw in Wikipedia that you had said that you disagreed with Senator, well, now President Obama, but that you loved him. And I wondered if we had missed something about him, and perhaps you could explain.
No, I don't think you've missed anything. You know, if you want to change people, you got to love them. You got to give yourself, you got to give your life away to them. You got to be vulnerable to them. You got to be able to take a punch for them. President Obama is a polar opposite of me in terms of political philosophy. Pretty obvious, right? But as a human being, struggling with everything that he's struggling with, I think he's one heck of a human being. I just don't agree with him. And that's the key point here. Is we have confused political disagreement with avarice and hate. And leadership should draw us away from that. You know, I worry about our country in terms of anarchy because of so much loss of confidence in the rule of law and now the rule of rulers. But real leaders calm that down and say, let's see how we can, and that's why I'm disappointed in what he did last night is, you know, you have an election, let's go try for 60 days and see if you can't work something out before you poke your finger in everybody's eye. But again, he's still a human being, and I guarantee I've made just as many mistakes in my life or more than he has, and only my Creator knows. But my wife probably does too. The fact is the way you change people is you invest in them and love them. And I'm going to invest in him and love him until he's no longer president, and hopefully invest in him more after that.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks everyone for coming.